Today I want to talk about the Masoretic Text and the Greek Septuagint. I have an article here called The Masoretic Text, a Medieval Karaite Project, not a 1st century scripture. This is an important discussion because we are looking at which Bible did Jesus and the apostles use? What was the Bible they referred to? We're going to answer that question. Now, when people speak of the Masoretic Text as if it were the Hebrew Bible that was known to Christ and the apostles, they are betraying both the chronology and the historical facts. The Masoretic Text is not a 1st century artifact. It is the end product of a 6th to 10th century editorial project executed under Karaite influence centuries after the time of Christ, in an intellectual climate shaped by Islamic dominance and rationalist literalism, the Septuagint and the Apostles. Every book of the New Testament quotes the Old Testament. Statistics gathered by Archer and Chiricigno in Old Testament quotations in the New Testament from 1983 shows that approximately 340 citations align with the Septuagint or the LXX, while only 33 agree with the later Masoretic form. In their survey, they looked at every single Old Testament quotation in the New Testament. Now, the Septuagint was the Bible of the Apostolic Church. It was the text used in the Hellenistic synagogues, familiar in Greek-speaking Judea, and recognized as scripture by Christ's disciples and the early fathers. The LXX itself was a translation from older Hebrew manuscripts, texts that predate the later Masoretic forms. The Dead Sea Scrolls confirm this. Multiple Hebrew variants exist, some supporting the LXX over the Proto-Masoretic readings. Thus, the scripture of the 1st century, the one that Christ's followers heard and quoted, was not the Masoretic text, but the Greek Septuagint. Let's look at the origin of the Masoretic text. After the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD and the Bar Kokhba revolt in 135 AD, Judaic scholarship reorganized in Jamnia or Yavne and later in Tiberias. It was there, over the following centuries, that grammarians known as the Masoretes or the transmitters began fixing vowel points and marginal notes, Masora, to standardize the text. But their work matured not in the early Christian period. It belongs to the medieval Levant under the Abbasid Caliphate, when both Rabbinite and Karaite Jews lived under Islamic rule. The oldest full Masoretic codices are the Codex Cairensis, dated 895, Aleppo Codex, the 10th century, and the Leningrad Codex, early 11th century, are a millennium late. That is 1,000 years later than when Jesus walked the earth with the apostles. There was no Masoretic text in the 1st century, only a variety of Hebrew textual traditions. The Codex Cairensis, traditionally dated to 895, is a Hebrew manuscript containing the complete text of the Nevi'im, the prophets of the Hebrew Bible. It is described as the oldest dated Hebrew Bible codex that has survived to modern times. But some modern research and radiocarbon dating suggest it might actually date to the 11th century rather than 895. Now, the Karaite connection and sola scriptura. Now, the Karaites emerged in the 8th to 9th centuries, perhaps sooner. And this as a reaction to Rabbinic Judaism. Like the Sadducees that Jesus condemned, they rejected the oral Torah, the Talmud and Midrashic tradition, appealing instead exclusively to the written text, to the Bible alone, otherwise known as the Mikra, hence their name and method, a kind of sola scriptura centuries before Martin Luther fell. Now, their literalist approach to scripture was deeply influenced by the rationalism of Islamic Kalam theology. Karaites functioned intellectually alongside Muslim Mutazilite thinkers, adopting the same grammatical and philosophical methods. This alignment shaped their canon and hermeneutic. Where Rabbinic Judaism preserved broader oral commentary, the Karaites sought a fixed written standard, precisely what the Masoretes systematized. Their scriptural reductionism mirrored Islam's devotion to a single written revelation, the Quran, and rejection of interpretive tradition. Now, Christianity and the living magisterium. The Church of the first centuries, by contrast, never embraced that written text isolationism. The apostles themselves preached from the Greek scriptures. Their theological vocabulary flowed from the Septuagint's translation choices. When Christian canon discussions occurred from the 2nd to 4th centuries, the Septuagint corpus, including what the Protestants later disparagingly call the Apocrypha, the Deuterocanon, was simply treated as scripture. Thus, when reformers grounded their Bible-only rule on the Hebrew text, standardized by post-Christian Karaites, they returned to the intellectual company of medieval Judaism under Islam, not the Apostolic Church. The premise and the contradiction. Looking at this very logically, premise 1. The apostolic and patristic tradition used the Septuagint as scripture with an overwhelming 10-to-1 preference for the Greek Bible. Premise 2. The Masoretic text was formalized between the 6th and 10th centuries with Karaite influence. Premise 3. The Karaites were the sola scriptura Jews, like the Sadducees, rejecting tradition and mirroring Islam's textual literalism. To conclude, to base Christian canon or doctrine on the Masoretic text is to adopt a post-Christian, anti-traditional filter foreign to both Christ and his church. The so-called Hebrew original of the Protestant Old Testament is not the Hebrew that Christ read, nor the one the apostles cited. It is a medieval recension crafted in an environment more Islamic than apostolic, and more Karaite than Catholic.